Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing American Psycho, and this came out in the year 2000, and it was directed by Mary Harron. This film is based on a book that was very controversial in its day in the early 90s, and this film is as well, I think. It's one of those movies that's very deceptive in terms of maybe the way it might have been marketed. If you look at just the movie poster by itself, you'd think it was just some kind of run-of-the-mill generic slasher movie. I mean, that's certainly what I thought when I was a kid growing up, but it wasn't until I saw it that I realized that this is a very important film, a film that does have, I think, a lot of gravitas, and it's a commentary on society. Rather than just being run-of-the-mill entertainment, as it so easily could have been, it explores violence and materialism and how both of them have almost become interchangeable in a very kind of massed consumerist culture. Looking at the cover of it, or maybe seeing some of the most famous scenes that tend to be violent scenes, you might kind of be thrown off by the film, but it's actually very, very funny. It's a comedy of manners. It's a very biting satire. This film takes place in the 80s. It's during the Reagan era, at the height of the resurgence of excess. So, people were really into like Arnold Schwarzenegger type movie stars, big, buff, masculine people. That was when, it's hip to be square. That's kind of the catchphrase for America at the time, because America was becoming this very kind of Donald Trump inspired corporate capitalist nation. And this particular film takes place in, I think, 1987, and the film is about a guy named Patrick Bateman, and this is played by Christian Bale, and he's this young professional working on Wall Street. He has what appears to be everything. He's got the perfect body, the perfect hair, the perfect job, he's got the girl and the chic apartment, but he moonlights as a serial killer. And in this particular film, we start to see all of these excursions catch up to him, and he is afraid that he might get caught. I think a big part of why people connect to this film is because Christian Bale is hilarious, and that's not something you hear very often. Christian Bale is so associated with being a very intense, very, I guess, method actor. But I think his intensity works in this film because it is the butt of the joke. Like, he recognizes his intensity and he just blows it out of proportion to the point where it's so over the top, but it's great, it's funny. I love his mannerisms and his expressions are so great. He's very superficially cold, and like every kind of Wall Street stereotype yuppie that you've ever seen in Manhattan. He's that pseudo-intellectual that doesn't seem to have any sort of personality, and that's one huge part of what the film is criticizing about people. And as I said, the film is definitely a comedy of manners, and Patrick Bateman personifies that idea. He's part of a very privileged society that wants everything in life to be perfect. They want everything to be orderly and beautiful and just completely in control. Yet within this means of control that we seem to be so obsessed with, especially in this culture, comes the inability to really have spontaneity, to really understand feeling or be able to experience it. And eventually that need for perfection in our lives becomes claustrophobic because we can't get to that vulnerable place that we ultimately want. And in the case of Patrick Bateman, that's what causes him to spiral out of control. He wants to rebel. He wants to rip away this perfectionism to find something meaningful possibly underneath. And he does it in a way that, of course, is not healthy, but, it's through violence, becoming a sociopath. And I think it's really interesting because it's very rare for an audience to get behind a character that is meant to be a parody of a type of person, because, Patrick Bateman is meant to be unlikable. He's meant to have practically no personality. He's meant to be everything that we hate in human beings. But I think that's one of the reasons why the film works so well, is because it's about him slowly cracking, trying to break through that perfectly groomed, perfectly exfoliated exterior that he has. One main point of this film is how, in entertainment particularly, how we glorify everything. We glorify lifestyles, we glorify the lives of celebrities, we glorify materialism, and we glorify violence in turn. And it's like that great line in Fight Club, the things we own end up owning us, and I think that that's a line that is very true to the philosophy of this movie. The film implements these ideas in a way that is really, really well done. in all kinds of different ways. Even just in the opening shot, you see these drips of what appears to be blood, but then it turns out to be like a red sauce that's decorating a plate. There's also the little slip-up line where Patrick says he's into murders and executions, and the girl misunderstands him and thinks he's into mergers and acquisitions. And it's just those subtle inserts that show how thin the line is between this angry greed and this kind of the way that we fetishize consumerism. And these metaphors continue as Bateman starts to really break down, in a sense. He always keeps everything at a distance because he has this superiority complex to kind of build up his ego. But you realize throughout the film and through the interactions with other characters, you realize just how insecure of a person he is. He cannot handle the idea of being in his own head, because that means that he's going to have to confront vulnerability, confront his own mortality, fear of losing everything that he has. And I think we can all relate to that idea of trying to find who we are. Whether or not it's through healthy ways or not, is up for debate, but we all have that identity crisis, and in that way, I think the film is quite an existential piece. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is one that's not talked about. You don't hear about it very often. It's a short scene, but I think it reveals a lot. And it's the scene in the bathroom where, with the character of Lewis, Patrick comes up behind him and he's about to kill him. But in that moment, Lewis reveals that he is in love with Patrick. And in that moment, Patrick is just stilted. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to react. He can't kill him. This is one of the very few times in the movie that Bateman shows any sort of humanity or restraint. It could be because either Bateman has some homosexual feelings that he hasn't tapped into, or it could just be the idea that somebody cares about him. He doesn't know how to accept affection because he's never really received it, at least as far as we know in the movie. That wasn't in a superficial sense. That's a sense of him losing control, and you see it immediately. After that moment, he starts washing his hands really vigorously, but he's washing his hands with the gloves on. It's almost like some sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. I really love little moments like that in the movie. I think that's what ultimately gives it the dimension that it really needs, because not only is it just a satire about artifice, but it's trying to show that there is pathos beneath all of this that is yearning to break free. As I said at the beginning, this film is directed by a woman, which I think is great, and because even today you don't see that many women directing movies, let alone horror films or slasher movies, whatever you want to call this. But the feminine touch is very evident in this movie by the way that she is examining voyeurism in terms of how it's viewed through the male gaze, mostly through Patrick's eyes. And that's depicted really well through different characters. There's Courtney, who Patrick is having the affair with, and she's, she looks like this, beautiful woman, but she's obviously very sad. You can see that, she wants love, but no one will accept it. Why? Because that's how beautiful women are often treated in society. Even Patrick says when she tries to show some sort of humanity, he just says, "You look marvelous, there's nothing else to say." But I think you see the real humanity in the hooker character that Bateman meets a couple times, and then in Jean, of course, who's his secretary, and that's played by Chloe Sevigny, or Sevigny, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I like that they have all of these different characters to show how women are objectified in different scenarios, and it's also where the movie finds its pathos. So yeah, even though the film is wickedly funny, I think actually there's quite a bit more, at least for me, that I take away from it. I mean, it's a really, really well-made piece of filmmaking, and it uses this medium to expose what I think is most uncomfortable about our society, which is our vices, exploring why we are so obsessed with them, why we feel like we need them. But when you strip all of that away, you realize there's something really unsettling going on beneath that. That's where you find all the misogyny, the anger, everything that we're struggling with internally. The film is completely aware of its conceits, and it explores them really well. There are wonderful, memorable scenes, and people have kind of idolized Patrick Bateman as this like Hannibal Lecter-like icon, but I think, if you really explore what the movie's trying to say, it's an important movie that does deserve its cult status, and I hope that more and more people watch it and that its reputation just grows. And that's my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page and the link below that one. Catch you next time.